It is the second model introduced in the 2023 Shaman King collaboration with Medarot, sporting a more Metaforce and Thunder-oriented kit. It is SKG01, the Raitei, with a kit of Spark Strike, Hyper Thunder, Overcharge, Biped Legs, and the leg ability of Super Armor, which grants immunity to paralyze ailments a certain number of times. Now, as the second model introduced behind Byakuyo, the Raitei is most certainly picking up where he left off with a very aggressive kit right from the start. And even though the kit itself may not seem like much, it's the base numbers that he's packing that make him stand out. With very good numbers, relatively decent armor, and some very solid leg specs on top of that, the Raitei most certainly is carrying the momentum that Byakuyo has begun when it comes to keeping the hype on the Shaman King collaboration. Spark Strike on the head part is a relatively conventional Metaforce-powered melee skill that has a very interesting skill to it, but when used correctly can be immensely powerful and make you immensely fast on top of that. Explaining Spark Strike briefly, upon attacking it, it will consume up to 10% or 5% when capped out of the user's Metaforce gauge. In trade of eating that Metaforce charge, your heat and your cool stats will go up by a staggering 50% for your next turn. Which means if you weren't already fast before, well, guess what? You're going Mach 3 by the time that skill finally kicks in. Now, of course, if there is no charge to draw from when you use Spark Strike, you will of course not get that heat and cool bonus. So do keep that in mind when you use it. But passive pierce damage on top of that does mean it will be a relatively solid conventional skill you can make use of, and Metaforce gain on top of that only adds icing to the cake as not a requirement but nice to have, and just again icing on the cake if you do manage to have it. Hyper Thunder on the right arm is a paralyzed ailment skill, but basically it's just regular thunder but with some extra power behind it. So compared to regular thunder, Hyper Thunder is packing higher base power, as you see there, almost 1530, and pierce damage on top of that, which means it's going to hit a whole lot harder than the regular Shocker Thunder skill might. In addition to this, it does also come with the caveat that you will be unable to dodge or defend while you are in your cooldown phase. So do exercise some caution if you do plan to make use of this, and incorporate some rather shocking traits into the team to stop the enemy cold and buy yourself a couple extra seconds of time. Overcharge on the left arm is a relatively unique skill. We've not seen it too terribly often, but in the right hands it can be absolutely catastrophic. Upon attacking the target, if they do not have 100% Metaforce charge, you will instead damage them for a certain amount and also fill their gauge by about 10 to 15%. Now this will continue to grow the more times you smack them with Overcharge on top of that. Now you're probably asking me, Bakuro, isn't giving the enemy Metaforce charge bad for you, as it means they can use a Metaforce nuke sooner? And you're right, it is a risk that you do need to make sure you pay attention to. However, Overcharge comes with a little bit more of an extra caveat to it. If you manage to attack a foe that has a 100% full Metaforce charge, the attack converts into an AoE, which will damage all parts instead of a single part, and your damage goes up at least 3 to 5 times. Which means if you weren't going to break the enemy before, well, you absolutely will be, as long as the enemy retains a full charge. In addition to this, I have also noticed it will also eat the opponent's charge on top of that if you do smack them at 100%, and relatively not only cripple them if they're somehow still alive after the attack, but also if they were planning to nuke you with the Metaforce, well, guess what? That's not happening. Biped legs means that the Raitei will have very solid coverage across most terrains, as bipeds have the most well-rounded and diverse coverage when it comes to terrain compatibility. And stats across the board are most certainly very solid as well, very aggressive, and some very good leg stats in addition to this. Head armor of 3100 HP, right arm that relatively hot, that's powerful looking shield thunder emitter at 3600, left arm at just shy of 3,000, and the legs at 3,250 as well. I'd say it's kind of par for the course, middle of the road for most biped type models, so nothing overly game breaking compared to other collab models, or even the Byakuyo to a degree as well. But the base power is where he kicks off as well. Spark Strike at just shy of 1500, Hyper Thunder at 1530, and Overcharge at 1313. Very solid and very promising base power before any modifiers are kicked in, and that's not including anything that he can do to himself. Biped legs, again with solid stats, a leg mobility of 920 will put him notably higher than Byakuyo, but it will already have a very impressive base speed before any other modifiers are brought into play. A higher evade than Byakuyo at 1507 is very, very nice as well, as it means landing a hit on this guy, whether it be a dodge or a graze, will be relatively tricky. He does have a notably lower melee resist though at 1327, and a very notably lower shoot resist at just barely 686 there, almost 700. So do exercise some caution if you are going to make use of the Raitei, his legs especially. But to compensate for the notably lower stats and higher speed, he also is packing super armor, which grants him immunity from any shock, freeze, or tornado-based attacks, a certain number of hits relative to the rank of the part. Now this alone puts it on a very good rank as well, as it means as long as you cannot be affected by any of those paralyzed ailments, there is nothing going to be stopping the Raitei from trucking on through and laying waste to any enemy that stands in his way. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I still do have to rate the Raitei kind of a middle-of-the-road, mid-tier, kind of 6.5 out of 10. Primarily for the reason that even though his kit can be very aggressive under the right circumstances, it does kind of require you to meet those said circumstances in order to do it. Spark Strike, or Charge Spark as it's also called, does kind of require you to actually have a Metaforce charge in order to use it. Hyper Thunder does have a good base power, but if the enemy has super armor or a stat cleanse on the team, the paralyzed addition to it is kind of wasted and just kind of leaves you wide open to punish with no dodge or defend. An Overcharge is kind of a risky move again as you actually give the enemy charge, but if you catch them quick enough at 100%, you will steal it back and basically nuke them to high heaven and back if you do manage to make that requirement. So again, it's a powerful kit, but rather scattered on top of that and hard to make use of when it comes to team synergy. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him notably higher at a 7.5 out of 10 for these same reasons, given that even though the kit together as a pure set is kind of weird, mixing up the parts is where you're really going to get the best bang for your buck. Spark Strike if you need to lay a hit back and forth super fast and just kind of slip it in there, in and out. Hyper Thunder for stopping enemies in their tracks and still managing to keep your power. Overcharge if you do manage to fit it in for any enemies that will try to capitalize on Metaforce sustain through full charge, fight full charge, shoot full charge, or anything similar. And Biped legs with super armor, you generally can't ever go wrong with either, even if you do have to sport the risk of a notably lower shoot resist and potentially nasty shoot punish on top of that just for using them.